What do you think? Is managing your weight more about calories or hormones? Well, I'm going to use an analogy today that's going to show the interrelationship between metabolism, food intake, and hormones. What's shaking, bacon? My name's Bruno Panucci. I've been doing this carnivore diet for about 1.25 years now. It's going really well. I've been sticking to the carnivore diet, very strict, not a lick, taste, or bite of any food I'm not allowed to have. And intermittently, I throw in the lion diet, which is just red meat. So I'm doing a red meat challenge, which is actually a really easy way of eating, between April, May, and June, and I might extend it for an extra month depending on how it goes. I'm limiting myself to 4 pounds of red meat a day. Just this week, I've finally been able to get some regular ground beef, so I've been able to have a higher fat intake in my diet, and I honestly think that might help with more weight loss. So I'm still going to get a lot of protein in that 4 pounds of regular ground beef. So I'm not too worried about the loss of protein that I'm getting, considering my fat intake is now going up. So let's break this down a little bit. I want to maintain my lean mass as I lose fat. Last time I had this checked out on a medical grade DEXA scan, and I'll show the numbers in an upcoming video. I was at, it was 185 pounds of lean mass. I want to build that lean mass up and try and burn fat at the same time. That's kind of difficult to do traditionally, but on a carnivore diet, which is a zero carb diet, I'm going to see how these numbers go. Now, I've been successful. The last 19 pounds I've lost has been just fat. And I was doing that having about 6,000 calories a day. Now, to break that down, my resting metabolic rate after my activity levels between exercise and just moving around through the day is roughly between 3,800 to 4,000 calories. So even though I was getting more calories than I needed in a day, I was still losing weight. So how is that possible? It can't be just about calories. So I'm going to use photography as a bit of an analogy. Photography is all about capturing light now and how you make it work for the camera. So there's a few main ways to manage light. One is called ISO, one is called shutter speed, and one is called aperture. So let's start with the aperture. When you get a lens on a camera, any camera, the aperture controls the light that's coming through the lens. Your lens has a diaphragm that the light passes through, and it can go smaller or bigger. The smaller the hole, the less light that's coming in. So you can control in your camera how much light you want the lens to let in. So that's the first source of fuel of light to your camera. Usually the bigger the hole, the more light that can come in, the more you can play around with things. The more light that comes into the camera means you can control the depth of field really well. So let's look at this, for example. I'm going to see if I can get my camera to focus on my hand. So the more light that comes in through that lens allows me to control the focus and depth of field. All the focus right now is on my hand, and when I take that away, the camera is going to focus now on my face. So now that we figured out the lens is what lets in all the light, we want to manage this light now. We want to now manipulate that light a little bit further. And we're going to do that with the shutter speed. The shutter on a camera is when you take the lens off of the camera and you look at the camera, there's a little trap door. And this trap door is kind of like a barn door. So that barn door opens and it lets all that light from the lens hit the sensor in the camera. Now, depending on how long you let that barn door stay open, it'll let more and more light into the camera. So this is another way we can control light. First, we let the light come in through the lens, and now we're playing with it when it hits the sensor. So that barn door opens, and then another barn door comes down and closes. So however long that stays open for is how much light hits the sensor. So our first line of defense is the lens. The second line of defense is the barn door, the shutter speed of the camera. So the faster the shutter speed, boom, boom, the less light that comes in. The third important feature when it comes to capturing light and manipulating light in a camera is the ISO. And the ISO is the camera's sensitivity to light. Inside the camera, it digitally raises all the lights so that you can kind of see what you were trying to take a photo of. But the side effect of that is it creates a lot of noise. So that noise, and you see that noise portrayed as like pixels, or you see it looks grainy. It's typically something you want to stay away from. You don't want grain and noise typically in a photo. You want it to look crystal clear. That's how your camera lets light in and how it manipulates light. The lens, lets in all the light, and the lens controls right from the very source. That's the first line of defense, what's going into the body of the camera. So you see where I'm going with this already. Now the camera, depending on the shutter speed, allows your body to manipulate how much light is going to be exposed to the sensor. So after that, we have the ISO. It can artificially create more light in the image so that it'll compensate on those really dark photos. The three things that all have an interrelationship with each other. You can't adjust one without it affecting the other two. It's as simple as that. So when you learn how to balance these three features on a camera, you can control all the light that's coming in and make your shots look exactly the way you want them. Now, how does this relate to the body? Well, let's take the shutter and that diaphragm that we open and close as food and calories. Some people will argue it's all about calories. So we want to watch the amount of calories we let in because that's what it all comes down to, and they ignore the metabolism and hormones. So we want to first and foremost have a clean fuel source. And when we want to have a clean fuel source, that's where we manage our carbohydrates. Some people barely get enough calories in the day, and some people have way too many. But what's more dangerous than that is the quality of calories. If we're getting a high carb or sugar diet and not enough protein and fat, it's just not healthy. What happens is our body needs protein. It needs protein. It's a basic building block for the body. Our body needs fat. Our brain's mainly made out of fat. Our nervous system's mainly made out of fat. Our body uses fat to transport hormones and nutrients all throughout our body. We need fat in our body. It is essential. So is protein. It's essential. But you know what's not essential? Carbohydrates. So we want to have a clean fuel source. Now, when it comes to photography, let's say we like to shoot in daylight temperature. So we're going to break this down a little bit further when it comes to quality of light. When you look at daylight temperature, for example, a daylight temperature bulb, look up at your ceiling or a light bulb in your room. If it has a white cast to it, it's probably a daylight temperature bulb. If it has a yellow color to it, it's more of like a sunrise or sunset temperature. For this analogy, we'll argue the dirtier light will be more distorted and yellowed, and that's going to be a evening temperature. So if you're taking a photo in the middle of the day beside a window and there's a yellow light bulb in the room, the camera doesn't know what to do with the two different light temperatures, and it gets really confused. So we want to stick with one light source, one clean light source, and we're just going to stick, for the sake of this analogy, with daylight temperature. But our food intake is like the lens. That's all the food coming into our body. The camera body, the shutter speed, is the same as our body. That's deciding what to do with the first amount of fuel that's coming into it. We want to be able to manipulate that food that comes into our body and work with that food and have it be a clean fuel source so our body can work efficiently. If those two things are out of whack, if we have too much fuel coming into our body or the wrong type of fuel coming through our lens, going into our body, our shutter's not going to handle it well. So our shutter is like our metabolism. It's trying to manipulate the food that's coming into it, the fuel source that's coming into it, the light that's going into the body, and it's trying to figure out what to do with it. So if there's too many carbs, it screws up our metabolism. And what happens is our body doesn't handle it well. Now we're going to the ISO, and the ISO is going to be the hormones. So the hormones try and manage the fact that we have too many carbohydrates in our body, and too many carbohydrates does this to the body. The camera's ISO is really sensitive to light. We don't want to put too much of a burden on that ISO. We want to typically keep that number nice and low. We don't want to have to use ISO. So our hormones can get thrown out of whack if our blood sugar is too high. Too many carbohydrates in our body raise our blood sugar. When our blood sugar goes out of whack, our insulin goes out of whack. When our insulin goes out of whack, which is a hormone, by the way, our body doesn't know what to do because we're not burning it off. Our metabolism isn't working properly to burn it off. Our shutter speed has let in too much light. So what we want to do is compensate with our hormones. And if we're not burning those calories properly and our metabolism isn't working up to par, our hormones are going to be out of whack. And long story short, it's going to store that blood sugar as fat, and we're going to get fatter and fatter. And that, along with that is going to come all sorts of health conditions. So now all three of those things are all messed up. The food intake, the calories we take in, our metabolism and our hormones are not in balance. So when we manage our carbohydrates, it manages our calories and lets a good fuel source into the body. Our body then knows how to process that fuel more efficiently. And then after that, our ISO, our hormones, can manage optimally. So once our hormones get balanced with a balanced metabolism and a good quality fuel source, our body can work in harmony. All three of these things, the fuel source, how our body adjusts to that fuel source with our lean mass, and just our fast or slow metabolism will have a direct impact on the ISO. The ISO turns and has a direct impact on the shutter speed. You can't change one of those numbers without it having an effect on the other two. So what we want to do is find that happy medium between our aperture, our shutter speed, and our ISO. Our fuel intake, we want to have it as clean as possible. We want to have a good functional running metabolism, moderate exercise with weight-bearing exercise, so that it can actually manage the fuel source coming into it, which has a more manageable impact on our hormones. So what we want to do is keep the balance between these three things. It's not all about calories, and it's not all about hormones, and it's not all about having a fast metabolism. It's the marriage of the three that are important to us, and we want to balance those three. And going down to a zero-carb diet is one of the best ways to manage that. So I hope you didn't find this too confusing. I hope you enjoyed this analogy. I'm really going to start fleshing it out more. I just thought of it today and I was like, man, that really works. So I liked it. We're going to see how this works. I'm going to play around with this analogy a little further because there's so many settings on a camera and our body has so many settings in it. It's a good way to help people to understand how everything works. So I want you to take care. If you have any questions, leave a comment in the comment section. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up.